19 seconds. That's all it took for Jasmine Crockett to detonate the Senate. Before Karoline Leavitt could finish her sentence, Jasmine unleashed never-before-heard Trump-Putin tapes that turned the chamber into a battlefield. Senators shouted. Leavitt's face went white, and 27 million Americans watched history crack open on live TV. What could be on those tapes that made Washington's most powerful voices fall silent? The screen froze on Karoline Leavitt's face, her lips still forming the word inherited, and then the sound came back like a slap. Biden inherited this war. A pause, a blink, the faintest tremor in her smile. Russia did not invade Ukraine under President Trump. The Fox News chyron blared Biden's Ukraine failure in bold red, but that single word inherited cut through every talking point like a blade. Someone in the control room must have known it was bad, because within seconds the segment was replayed. This time slower, the audio deepened, the syllables stretched until they became a confession. By the time it aired a third time, social media had detonated. Hashtag Freudian slip hit #1 on Twitter in under 7 minutes. TikTok looped the clip with captions screaming she just admitted it. YouTube Shorts filled with freeze frames of Leavitt's eyes whitening mid-sentence, spliced with headlines about Trump's years, office, and maps of Ukraine's war zones. Comment sections bold. Did she just hand Crockett the win? This is political suicide. Every share poured gasoline on the fire. In a crowded committee room 2 miles away, Jasmine Crockett's phone buzzed once, twice, then again. She glanced down and saw the clip 3 times over, sent by 3 different aides with the same one-word message. Boom. Jasmine hit play. The moment inherited rolled off Leavitt's tongue, Jasmine's expression sharpened, her eyes narrowing as if she could burn the screen. Her colleagues kept talking around her, but the sound had gone hollow in her ears. This wasn't a gaffe, it was a rupture, and she could feel the pressure building behind it. She thought of every Trump rally promise she'd heard dissected in committee. Putin would never invade if I were president. She remembered the families of Ukrainian refugees she met at Dallas shelters, clutching photos of homes reduced to rubble. She remembered veterans who told her they fought for a country that now treated foreign policy like a punchline. And now, on live national TV, Trump's own spokesperson had let the mask slip. It wasn't Biden who invented this war, he'd inherited it from Trump. Her phone lit again. Bernie Sanders, chief of staff this time. Get this into committee. Jasmine typed back without hesitation. Book it. On the far wall, a muted TV flickered with the same Fox clip. But now the anchors were smiling to why, their voices low and rehearsed, promising context after the break. Jasmine knew exactly what that meant. Damage control. Somewhere, Ted Cruz was already rehearsing lines about liberal witch hunts, and Marco Rubio was polishing a phrase like nothing burger. She almost smiled. Because this wasn't about party spin anymore. It was about leverage, one careless phrase that could unravel years of political theater. If pulled hard enough, she would pull it, and she would do it under the blinding lights of the Senate, with every camera in the country watching. The risk was monumental. The reward could be history. What happens when a single word becomes a weapon? The nation was about to find out. The clip was barely an hour old when the newsrooms went feral. Red lights flared in control booths. Producers barked orders over the chaos, and every major network tore into their archives like surgeons prepping for an emergency. On CNN, the segment played in an endless loop, alongside maps of Eastern Europe and a scrolling list of Trump-era meetings with Putin. MSNBC's chyron screamed the slip that shook Washington. At Fox, the control room made a desperate splice, cutting the moment mid-sentence, filling the gap with stock footage of Biden shaking hands with Zelensky. But the internet had already locked its jaws around the unedited version. In MAGA war rooms, damage control shifted into overdrive. Surrogates hit friendly podcasts and radio shows, each repeating the same shaky script. It was just a misstatement. Don't let the radical left twist it. Yet the strain showed in their eyes, in the clip delivery of talking points. Conservative influencers flooded Twitter with memes mocking Democrat hysteria, but their attempts to bury the hashtag Freudian slip were drowned under millions of retweets. Every correction only gave the original video more oxygen. Inside a high-ceilinged conference room at DNC headquarters, the mood was a razor's edge between disbelief and exhilaration. Laptops glowed with Lev poll trackers, charts climbing with every replay of Leavitt's words. A veteran strategist leaned forward, voice slow and certain. This isn't a gaffe, it's an open door. If we don't walk through now, it slams shut forever. Another scrolled through targeted district data, tapping the screen. We push this into the suburbs, we break the firewall. Yet even here, beneath the thrill, they knew one thing was missing: someone fearless enough to carry the fight into the chamber. Jasmine Crockett stood in her office, the Capitol dome lit against the night sky behind her. She watched the clip one more time, letting the word inherited roll like a grenade in her head. It wasn't just the political hypocrisy, it was the insult to the people she'd met in church basements and shelter kitchens, survivors who had lived through what Leavitt dismissed in a breath. She felt the heat rise in her chest, the kind that didn't fade until you did something about it. Her phone buzzed. Bernie Sanders, Chief of Staff. Foreign Relations Committee meets Thursday. She's on the witness list. Jasmine's reply was instant. Put me on first round. The decision was made. The path set. No cable spin, no filtered interview. This would be a confrontation in the marble chamber, under oath, live to the nation. She could already picture the moment. The clip playing on giant monitors, Leavitt's composure cracking under the weight of her own woes. But Jasmine also knew the risk. If she misstepped, the machine would chew her up and spit her out. Was America ready to hear the truth she was about to unload? Or would the country look away when the mask was finally ripped off? The announcement hit the wires just after dawn. Senate Foreign Relations Committee to hold special hearing on Ukraine war narratives, Karoline Leavitt to testify. Within minutes, Chyron bars lit up across CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, each promising wall-to-wall coverage. CNN's Wolf Blitzer called it a showdown with stakes higher than the war of words, MSNBC teased the test of truth, and Fox framed it as another Democrat ambush. The buzz was instant, the network salivating over the ratings. Outside the Capitol, camera crews set up as if preparing for an inauguration. Ted Cruz wasted no time in stepping before the microphones. Standing in the glare of the Texas morning sun, he promised to destroy Democrat lies and accused Jasmine Crockett of weaponizing a verbal slit pinned to an international smear campaign. His voice dripped with practiced outrage, every sentence calibrated for the evening news cycle. Leavitt, standing beside him, nodded without speaking, her smile a mask stretched too tight. The MAGA base roared online, memes and hashtags flooding the feeds, but behind the bluster there was a nervous current. They knew the clip wasn't going away. Inside a secure committee room, Jasmine Crockett and Bernie Sanders, and, over a table strewn with printed timelines, declassified memos, and maps dotted with Russian troop movements from 2014 to the present. The air smelled of burnt coffee and paper ink. Bernie tapped a file labeled confidential, briefing notes, and said, "This is your foundation. Don't just hit her on the slip, hit her on the history they've tried to erase." Jasmine's hands moved fast, highlighting connections between Trump-era inaction and the current crisis. She could feel the story tightening into a noose, one she intended to place gently, then pull hard, in full public view. Outside, the hearing chamber was being transformed into an arena. Extra seating was brought in for press, lighting rigs adjusted for live HD feeds, and security doubled in anticipation of protesters on both sides. The marble walls seemed to hum with expectation. Every detail was designed for spectacle, but Jasmine knew the line between theater and detonation was razor thin. One wrong note, one overreach, and the moment would collapse into partisan no's. One precise strike, and it could redefine the national conversation. She stood at the chamber's threshold during a final walkthrough, listening to the echo of her own footsteps. Somewhere in this room, in less than 24 hours, the word inherited would be replayed on massive monitors, and the air would change. The question was no longer whether she was ready. It was whether the country could handle what was coming. Would this be just another performance for the cameras or the political explosion that ripped the mask off an entire movement? The Senate chamber pulsed like a live wire, the air thick with heat from 100 camera lights burning into the polished mahogany desks. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Reporters crammed shoulder to shoulder with their notepads balanced on knees, the low murmur of pre-hearing chatter buzzing like an electrical current. From the press balcony, lawn camera lenses tracked every movement, broadcasting to millions waiting at home. Outside, the sound was a constant roar. Protesters pressed against metal barricades, some waving Ukrainian flags in the bright morning sun, others thrusting MAGA banners high like battle standards. Chants clashed in the air, one side shouting "Stop Putin's war," while the other bellowed Trump 2024, until it became a dissonant wall of sound. A line of Capitol Police moved through the crowd like a blade through water, their faces impassive behind dark glasses. Somewhere beyond the barricades, a man with a bullhorn yelled about treason, while a group of college students in blue and yellow scarves sang the Ukrainian national anthem, their voices shaking but defiant. The scene outside fed the tension, and inside every aide, every senator knew this was no ordinary hearing. The air felt charged, as if a single wrong word could set off something bigger than the walls could contain. The door at the far end swung open, and Karoline Leavitt stepped in. The smirk on her face was calculated, the slow pace of her walk designed for the cameras. She wore the confidence of someone who believed she'd already rehearsed every question, already mapped every trap. Flashes from photographers lit her in bursts, each click freezing her smile in sharp, almost brittle relief. She took her seat at the witness table without looking toward the gallery, her hands folded neatly on the stack of notes in front of her. 2 minutes later, the opposite door opened, and Jasmine Crockett entered. Her stride was quick, deliberate, every step a statement. The hum of the room shifted instantly, to press turning as one to capture her approach. She carried no visible notes, only a slim folder under her arm, but the steel in her eyes suggested she didn't need a script. She stopped briefly at her chair, scanning the room not with the detached glance of a politician, but with the focus of someone calculating angles, distances, reactions. When her gaze swept across to Leavitt, the smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. The committee chair's gavel rested silently on the desk, but everyone knew the second it struck, the performance would begin. This was more than a hearing, it was a battlefield dressed in mahogany and marble, and both women had walked in knowing only one would walk out with her credibility intact. The question lingering in the air was heavier than the cameras, sharper than the chants outside. Whose voice would dominate the airwaves when the dust settled today? The gavel fell with a sharp crack, and the room's hum collapsed into a brittle silence. All eyes shifted to Jasmine Crockett as she rose, the faint rustle of her jacket amplified by the chamber's perfect acoustics. Her voice was steady, each syllable landing like a measured blow. "We are here," she began, gaze locked on the witness table, "to separate fact from fiction, to strip away the slogans and the spin, and to confront the truth no matter how inconvenient it may be to those who have built their careers on avoiding it." A ripple passed through the gallery. Tense posed midair, cameras tightened their focus, waiting for the strike that everyone knew was coming. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward as her turn came, flashing the rehearsed half-smile of someone who had practiced every word in front of a mirror. She began with a low, controlled tone. "This so-called controversy is nothing more than semantic noise and intentional distortion of a simple misstatement by those who cannot win on policy or facts." Her hands rested deliberately on the table, fingers spread, as though anchoring herself against a tide she refused to acknowledge. President Trump kept America safe. Under his leadership, there was no full-scale invasion of Ukraine. That is the reality, and no amount of political theater will change it. Before the air could settle, Ted Cruz's chair scraped back with a sharp metallic note, the sound like a blade against stone. "Mr. Chairman," he cut in, his voice rising above the murmurs, "this is exactly what I warned about Democrats weaponizing words, twisting them to smear political opponents." He turned, almost theatrically, toward Jasmine. Instead of addressing actual threats, they obsess over one slip of the tongue, because they're desperate to distract from this administration's failures. The camera caught his raised eyebrow, the practiced indignation, the subtle nod toward the MAGA base watching at home. Jasmine's lips curved in something between a smile and a warning. She didn't glance at Cruz, her eyes stayed on Leavitt, but the temperature in the room shifted, anticipation coaling tighter. The chairman's gavel tapped once, a reminder of order that felt more symbolic than effective. Journalists in the gallery scribbled faster, sensing the fault lines already showing beneath the veneer of protocol. It was all still polite on the surface, but like an over-pressurized valve, the hiss beneath was getting louder, more insistent. From the outside, the proceedings might still look orderly to women, one table, a days of senators presiding. But in the chamber, the tension had become physical, an almost tangible weight pressing against the marble walls. Everyone could feel, building, the inevitability of decorum giving way to something raw. The only question now was how long before civility cracked wide open, and when it did, who would be the first to draw real blood. Jasmine didn't move her eyes from Leavitt when the chairman nodded for her to proceed. Her tone was deceptively calm, but each word landed with the weight of a hammer. "If President Biden inherited this war," she said, letting the phrase hang in the chamber, "then from whom did he inherit it?" The question struck like a sniper's shot, clean, precise, impossible to dodge. For a beat, the only sound was the faint hum of the cameras, lenses trained tight on Leavitt's face. Leavitt's practiced composure faltered. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. What I meant," she began, but the hesitation was blood in the water. The gallery leaned forward, breaths caught, as Jasmine's eyes sharpened like glass. Ted Cruz's voice cut through the tension, loud and deliberate. "Mr. Chairman, this is a bad faith attack." She already clarified it was a misstatement. His tone was part outrage, part performance, every syllable pitched for the evening news cycle. The chairman's gavel came down hard. Order. But the word did little to smother the heat in the room. Jasmine didn't blink, didn't turn toward Cruz. She kept her gaze locked on Leavitt, as if the rest of the chamber had ceased to exist. "No, Senator," she said evenly, "I'm asking a question any American with a calendar could answer. If it was inherited, it must have come from someone." The implication hung there, daring Leavitt to speak. Leavitt's fingers tightened on the edges of her prepared notes, the paper crinkling audibly under the microphones. The timeline is complex," she managed, her voice catching on the word complex. Murmurs rippled through the audience seats, the sound of 100 private judgments whispered at once. From somewhere in the back, a stifled laugh broke the tension for a second before dying out. Jasmine leaned forward, just enough to breach the invisible line between inquiry and confrontation. "Complex is not the same as unclear. The American people deserve clarity. Ms. Leavitt, which administration left this war on President Biden's desk?" Each word was measured, but beneath it throbbed the unspoken accusation. "Say his name." Cruz's chair scraped loudly again as he rose. "Point of order, this is nothing but political theater." The chairman's gavel slammed twice, echoing against the marble like distant thunder. The air in the room felt heavier, as if everyone inside knew they were witnessing the first real break in the hearing's fragile decorum. Somewhere in the press gallery, a camera operator whispered, "We've got it," and zoomed tighter on Leavitt's face. A bead of sweat traced a slow line down her temple. She inhaled to answer, but her voice didn't come right away, the pause stretching into something dangerous. Outside the chamber, protesters' chants bled faintly through the thick walls, two worlds colliding in one moment. Would Karoline Leavitt stand her ground under the glare of the nation, or would this be the second she unraveled for everyone to see? Jasmine didn't waste the silence. She reached into the slim folder she'd kept under her arm since entering the chamber and pulled out a stack of documents bound in a single black clip. The top page was stamped in bold red, "Declassify." "These," she said, her voice cutting clean through the air, "are memos from the National Security Council and the State Department briefings delivered directly to President Trump detailing Russia's escalating military posture toward Ukraine." She laid the first sheet on the witness table in front of Leavitt, then turned another toward the committee cameras so the press gallery could catch every word in the lens. Bernie Sanders, seated 2 chairs down, slid a smaller stack toward her printouts marked in neon yellow, entire sentences underlined twice. Jasmine didn't need to look, she'd memorized them. On February 14, 2018, she read aloud, "The NSC warned of Russian troop buildup in Luhansk and Donetsk. The memo urged immediate coordination with NATO allies." Her eyes flicked up to the committee days. Trump received this briefing personally, and he ignored it. Gasps and murmurs broke through the audience. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. She turned another page. August 21, 2019, another classified cable. Potential for full-scale invasion increasing. Recommend additional sanctions, again, delivered to the president, again, no action taken. The rhythm of her words was deliberate, like a prosecutor pacing a jury toward the inevitable. Beside her, Bernie passed one more sheet, a single paragraph boxed in ink. Jasmine read it without breaking eye contact with Leavitt. Quote, "Political priorities outweigh deterrence measures." She let the last phrase hang, the weight of it pressing down on the room. Leavitt leaned into her microphone, voice taut. "Representative Crockett, I realize sound bites make better headlines than policy briefings," she said, letting the corner of her mouth curl just enough to suggest control. That national security isn't a TikTok clip, and cherry-picking a line from a briefing doesn't make you a strategist. She glanced toward the press gallery before continuing, each word coded in disdain. If you truly cared about the safety of our allies, you'd know that deterrence sometimes happens in silence where cameras can't follow and critics can't tweet. Jasmine's head tilted, a faint, almost incredulous smile at the corner of her lips. Context. She echoed, flipping the top sheet toward the audience so the highlighted warnings blazed under the chamber lights. Because from where I'm standing, the context is that your administration had every warning, every opportunity, and still chose to do nothing. Cruz raised a hand, starting to object, but the chairman waved him down. The tension in the chamber had shifted, less the brittle quiet of before, more like the charged stillness before a summer storm breaks. Leavitt's fingers twitched on the tabletop, her polished confidence thinning by the second. Jasmine stepped closer to the witness table, her voice dropping just enough to make the press lean in. You call these pages incomplete, you say they lack context. I think America deserves to hear exactly what the context is, Ms. Leavitt. Unless, of course, the truth is something you'd rather keep sealed. The gavel stayed still, the room holding its breath. What was hiding in the shadows of these documents that made Karoline Leavitt so afraid to let the rest of the story into the light? Cruz's chair scraped against the marble with an exaggerated screech, drawing every eye to him. He rose slowly, adjusting his jacket with the air of a man about to deliver a sermon. Mr. Chairman, he began, voice booming just enough to carry over the low hum of the press gallery, this entire line of questioning is out of order. We are not here to conduct a trial against the former president. We are here to discuss foreign policy moving forward. He gestured toward the stack of memos Jasmine had laid bare, his tone sharpening. Dragging declassified fragments into this hearing without the full record is nothing more than a political stunt, and I move we strike it from the record. The words dropped like a gavel of their own, calculated to shift the momentum back to Leavitt. Jasmine didn't sit, she didn't even glance at the chairman. Instead, she pivoted toward Cruz, the weight of her gaze slicing through the air between them. Senator, she said, each syllable crisp as broken glass, you can't hide behind parliamentary tricks when democracy is on the line. Her voice rose not in volume, but in intensity, tight with the kind of conviction that can't be rehearsed. These aren't fragments, they are warnings, delivered to a president who looked the other way while our allies braced for an invasion. And every American has the right to know that. The chamber stilled for a beat, the tension coiling like a spring. Cruz opened his mouth to retort, but a ripple of sound interrupted scattered applause breaking out from the audience seats. It wasn't loud, but it was defiant, the kind of breach in decorum that carried its own charge. A Capitol police officer stepped forward as if to quiet it, but the chairman let it ride for a heartbeat longer, perhaps sensing the moment's gravity. Jasmine didn't look toward the applause, she kept her eyes locked on Cruz, letting the nose punctuate her point. You talk about moving forward, she continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the room pressing in. But how do you chart a course for the future when you refuse to acknowledge the road that got us here? This isn't theater, this is the record, and the record is clear: warnings ignored, threats downplayed, lives put at risk. She stepped back toward the witness table, her presence filling the space without raising her tone. Cruz's jaw tightened, his hands curling on the edge of his desk. For a flicker of a second, the mask slipped just enough for the cameras to catch. The chairman's gavel tapped once, more for show than order, and the room seemed to lean forward as one. Jasmine had seized the moment, but the energy in the chamber was volatile, shifting like dry tinder in the wind. Could she hold it, or would the next exchange ignite a fire she couldn't contain? Leavitt's fingers twitched as she reached for her notes, the glossy pages slipping against each other with a faint hiss. One corner bent, another slid halfway off the stack, and in the scramble to realign them, the microphone picked up the soft but unmistakable rustle of paper, betraying her composure. The camera operator in the press balcony caught it instantly, tight zoom on her hands, to tremor visible to millions watching live. On Twitter, split-screen feeds began circulating in real time, Jasmine's unblinking stare on one side, Leavitt's shaky grip on the other. Jasmine stepped into that silence like it was her own territory. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. This isn't just about 2022, she said, her words falling heavy in the still air. This started in 2014, when Russia took Crimea, when the Donbas lit up, when the warning signs were flashing in every intelligence briefing and Donald Trump did nothing, she let the sentence hang just long enough for the weight of nothing to echo in the chamber's marble ribs. Leavitt's eyes flicked down to her notes, searching for a lifeline in bullet points that suddenly felt inadequate. The order was off. The next talking point was buried somewhere in the middle of the stack. She shuffled again, a little faster this time, to sound sharper, edgier. From somewhere in the audience came the faint click of a pen stopping mid-scribble. Even Cruz, who had been posed for another objection, leaned forward with the kind of alert stillness that suggested he knew something was slipping here, something he might not be able to grab back. The feed director for CNN whispered into his mic, "Hold that shot," as the camera stayed fixed on Leavitt's hands. In living rooms and coffee shops across the country, viewers leaned closer to the screen, sensing the shift in air pressure. Jasmine pressed her advantage, taking a single step nearer to the witness table, the leather solace of her shoes clicking softly, audibly in the chamber's acoustics. You can call it semantics, you can call it a slip, you can even call it taken out of context, she continued. But you can't rewrite history. History is sitting in these declassified files. History is what your administration chose to ignore. Leavitt finally looked up, meeting Jasmine's eyes for a brief, unsteady second before glancing toward the committee chair, as if silently asking for rescue. None came. The gavel stayed still. The only sound was the faint whir of the broadcast cameras adjusting focus. Somewhere outside, the muffled chants of protesters bled into the chamber, their voices indistinct but urgent, like a drumbeat approaching from a distance. A muscle in Leavitt's jaw tensed, and she drew in a slow breath. The nation could see the calculation behind her eyes fight, deflect, or concede. That as the next round of evidence loomed like a loaded chamber, the real question was whether she would admit the truth now, or wait to be buried by what was coming next. The chamber doors creaked open, and every head turned. A man in a dark suit stepped in, moving with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who knew the weight of what he carried. His face was partly hidden beneath the brim of a plain navy cap, but there was no mistaking the tension in his jaw. In one hand, he clutched a slim black case, the kind designed to hold something either priceless or dangerous. Capitol Police flanked him, not guiding, not restraining, just watching with the wary focus reserved for people who could tilt history with a single move. Jasmine's eyes locked on him, a flicker of recognition tightening her chest. She didn't know his name, but she knew that walk, the posture of a man who had lived too long with something he wasn't supposed to say. He reached the witness table, removed his cap just enough to reveal a sliver of his face. Gasps broke from the gallery. This was the former State Department aide who had vanished 3 years ago. Whispered about in rumors, some said he fled overseas after refusing to bury intel under Trump's orders. Now he was here, in the most televised room in America. Two metallic clicks echoed as he opened the case. From it, he lifted a matte black device, no brand, no markings, nothing to suggest what it could do except the way he handled it, as if it could burn through the table. He set it down, center stage under the chamber lights. The chairman leaned forward. "Do you understand you are appearing under oath?" The aide's nod was short, sharp. He adjusted the mic, the scrape of metal on wood amplifying in the tense air. "What I have here," he said evenly, "is an unaltered recording from a closed-door meeting between Donald J. Trump and Vladimir Putin. It was never meant to see daylight." The room fractured into gasps and whispers. Cruz froze mid-breath. Leavitt's fingers dug into her pen until the plastic groaned. Jasmine stayed still, but her pulse thudded in her ears because if this was real, everything was about to detonate. The aide's hand hovered over the device, not pressing play, just letting the anticipation coil tighter. Cameras leaned in, the gallery stopped breathing, and in that knife-edge silence, one thought cut through every mind in the room. What could be on this tape that was dangerous enough to be buried for years? And why was it being unleashed now? The aide's thumb pressed a recess button, and the device gave a low, mechanical click before a burst of static filled the chamber. Then, clear as if they were in the room, came Trump's voice, unmistakable, deliberate. "We'll deal with Ukraine later." The pause was brief, but it carried a weight that seemed to suck the air from the chamber. Then came the sound of laughter, deep, measured, and instantly identifiable as Vladimir Putin. It wasn't the laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of a man who had just been promised something. The reaction was instantaneous. Leavitt's composure shattered, her face draining to an ashen pallor. Her pen slipped from her hand and rolled toward the edge of the table, but she didn't move to catch it. Across the dais, senators shifted in their chairs, some leaning toward each other in sharp whispers, others frozen in place as if moving would make the moment more real. The marble wall seemed to hold the sound, amplifying every breath, every faint scrape of the chair leg. Bernie Sanders leaned toward Jasmine, his voice low but edged with fire. "That's it, that's the fracture." Jasmine didn't reply. Her eyes never left Leavitt, reading the micro-expressions in her face like a polygraph. Outside, through the thick glass, the nose of the protesters swelled, as if the crowd somehow knew something inside had changed. On the far end, Cruz bent toward a staffer, hissing a string of instructions too fast to catch, his knuckles white against the desk. A senator from across the aisle glanced toward the chairman, silently asking if the hearing should be halted. But the chairman didn't move, didn't speak. His gaze was fixed on the device, as though it might erupt again at any second. The aide sat back, his hands still near the recorder, as if guarding it. "That," he said into the mic, "was from a private meeting in Osaka, 2019. No notes, no staff, no record except for this." The words rippled outward, a fresh wave of murmurs breaking against the stillness. Cameras in the gallery pivoted between Leavitt's stiff frame, Jasmine's steady stare, and the impassive face of the witness who had just dropped a live grenade into the hearing. Jasmine finally leaned forward, her voice level but carrying to every corner of the room. "If this is just the beginning," she said, "then the rest of that recording isn't just history, it's evidence." The aide's eyes flickered toward her, and for the first time since entering, a shadow of hesitation crossed his face. The chairman cleared his throat, but it sounded more like a warning than a call to order. The aide's fingers hovered near the play button again, and the air tightened like a drawn bow. Everyone in the chamber knew that whatever came next could redraw the boundaries of American politics in a single breath. And hanging in that electric stillness was the question every heart was pounding toward: what was on the rest of that recording? The aide's finger tapped the play button again, and a sharp burst of static cut through the heavy air. Then came Trump's voice, this time lower, more transactional, each word soaked in the weight of a deal made behind closed doors. "Give me what I want in Moscow, and Ukraine can wait." The sentence landed like a hammer blow. For a heartbeat, the room didn't breathe. Then the sound erupted. Gasps rolled through the chamber like a breaking wave, journalists snapping their heads toward one another, pens scratching madly across notepads. The shock wasn't confined to the marble walls. Across the world, the livestream chat on YouTube detonated, messages flying faster than the feed could load. "He just sold them out. This is treason in real time. Play it again." The comment counter ticked upward like a speedometer, the numbers blurring as the clip ricocheted across social media. CNN producers whispered frantically into headsets, MSNBC's chyron changed mid-sentence, and Fox's control room scrambled to cut to commercial too late. The clip was already everywhere. At the witness table, Leavitt's knuckles were bone-white, gripping her papers so tightly the pages curled under her hands. Her lips pressed into a line so thin it seemed to disappear altogether. The polished mask she'd worn all morning was cracking, and the cameras were hungry for every fracture. Behind her, Cruz's posture stiffened, his eyes locked on the chairman as though silently begging for an intervention. Jasmine leaned forward, not rushing, savoring the silence that followed the gasps. Her voice was cool, but carried an edge that could cut steel. "That's your anti-war president." The question was a scalpel, precise and merciless, slicing straight through the narrative Leavitt had built her testimony on. She didn't blink, didn't shift her gaze away from Leavitt, letting the question hang long enough for the press to scribble it into headlines before the day was even over. Bernie Sanders, seated beside her, leaned back with the faintest shake of his head, as if to say it's over, but Jasmine knew it wasn't, not yet. Leavitt's eyes flicked toward Cruz, then to the chairman, but neither offered her an escape. She was alone at the table, the heat of the chamber pressing down on her like a spotlight she couldn't step out of. The aide didn't reach for the play button again, he didn't need to. The damage was already bleeding into the air, each second stretching the silence until it felt like the whole room was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Outside, the crowd noise swelled, faint but insistent chants mixing with shouted questions no one inside could answer. The camera zoomed tighter on Leavitt's face, hunting for the moment when her composure would finally break. She straightened her papers, inhaled sharply, and opened her mouth but stopped. How could she possibly spin this without shattering what little ground she had left? Leavitt's chair creaked as she leaned into the microphone, her voice tight, each word pushed out with brittle precision. These so-called recordings are complete fabrications manufactured to smear a president who put America first. She didn't blink as the words left her mouth, but her grip on the pen betrayed her. It trembled faintly between her fingers. They are spliced, doctored, edited by people with an agenda. And I will not dignify them as anything other than propaganda. The declaration rang sharp in the chamber, but the echoes carried a note of desperation she couldn't scrub out. Cruz seized the opening, leaning forward with the practiced fire of a man who thrives on confrontation. "Mr. Chairman," he said, voice booming enough to be replayed on every evening broadcast, "this is no longer about politics, this is about national security. These leaks are a direct assault on the integrity of the presidency. I demand an immediate FBI investigation into how this so-called evidence was obtained and disseminated." His gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge him, but the subtext was clear. Divert the conversation, shift the heat away from Leavitt, attack the source instead of the substance. The press gallery came alive in a flurry of movement, reporters firing off texts, camera shutters clicking like distant gunfire. Outside the thick walls, the nose of the protesters had shifted, splintering into dueling chants, one side roaring "play the tape," and the other answering "fake, fake." The tension inside mirrored the chaos outside, two realities grinding against each other with no sign of giving way. Jasmine didn't rise to Cruz's bait. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing on Leavitt with the calm of someone who's already won but hasn't yet announced it. "Fabrications," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the static of the room. Then came the smirk, small, deliberate, like the twitch of a blade before it draws blood. "Truth doesn't need editing." The words landed heavy, and for a split second, the room seemed to lean toward her, pulled by the weight of what she'd just said. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Cruz shuffled papers, clearly preparing another offensive, but the damage control already felt thin, like a tarp flapping in the wind while the storm tore through. The aide with the recorder sat motionless, his presence alone a silent counterweight to every denial Leavitt tried to muster. Bernie Sanders glanced down the table at Jasmine, his eyes asking the question the nation was now wrestling with. Did the evidence speak louder than the spin? On the live stream, the chat scrolled at breakneck speed, half calling the tapes irrefutable proof, half convinced they were deepfakes born in some political lab. The chamber hung suspended between two truths, the balance tipping with each replay, each whispered conversation, each tweet fired into the storm. And as the gavel hovered over the chairman's hand, the question pressed down on everyone like a physical weight. When the dust settled, would the public believe the denial, or the evidence that had just shaken the room to its core? Leavitt straightened in her chair, the pen she'd been gripping now set down with a faint, deliberate click. Her voice came low at first, each word sharpened to a point. "This isn't about truth, Congresswoman Crockett. This is about you grandstanding for social media, chasing your next viral clip while serious people do the work of governing." She let the accusation hang, her gaze sweeping the press gallery just long enough for the cameras to catch it, the subtext clear. Jasmine wasn't a lawmaker, she was a performer. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room, the tension thickening. Cruz folded his arms, lips curling in faint approval, as if savoring the hit. The air in the chamber shifted, less the restrained theater of a Senate hearing, more the electric stillness before a bar fight. Bernie Sanders leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, sensing the trajectory. Reporters in the gallery leaned forward in unison, pens posed, knowing a line like that never lands an answer. Jasmine's reaction was instantaneous. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, she leaned toward her microphone, her tone cool but charged, like a wire about to snap. "If fighting for truth is grandstanding," she said, "then I'll gladly take center stage." The words landed with a metallic ring, slicing clean through the nose. Her eyes stayed locked on Leavitt, the barest trace of a smile playing at the corner of her mouth, not one of amusement, but of someone daring her opponent to swing again. The chamber tightened around them, the rest of the committee receding into background noise. Leavitt's lips pressed thin, her knuckles flexing against the table's polished edge. The aide with the recorder didn't move, but his presence felt heavier now, like the silent witness to a duel that was no longer just political, it was personal. Outside, the protests swelled into a roar, faint through the thick walls, but perfectly timed, as if the crowd could feel the shift in battle lines. The chairman's gavel hovered but didn't fall, the hesitation and unspoken acknowledgement that something raw was unfolding, something the cameras would eat alive. Cruz muttered something under his breath to a staffer, his eyes flicking between the two women like a man watching a fuse burn toward the powder. Bernie's hands clasped loosely in front of him, but his gaze stayed sharp, calculating the moment Jasmine might need him to cut in or the moment she'd insist on standing alone. No one in the room was under the illusion that this was still about memos or tapes. The temperature had risen past the point of protocol, into the kind of heat that burns bridges and brands reputations for life. The press lenses stayed trained, waiting for the next blow. And in that split second of silence, the question pressed down on the room like a storm cloud: was this about to get personal, in the ugliest way possible? A sudden flicker from the press gallery monitors pulled the room's attention upward, screens lighting with a flood of real-time tweets, TikToks, and memes pouring in mid-hearing. On Twitter, Jasmine's center stage line was already looping over dramatic music, clocking hundreds of thousands of retweets. TikTok feeds showed split-screen edits of Leavitt's paling face next to the Putin audio, captions screaming "busted." On Instagram, memes exploded: Trump and Putin laughing over a Monopoly board labeled Ukraine, Leavitt photoshopped as a ventriloquist's puppet. Every refresh brought a new wave, the outside world pounding against the chamber walls in pixels and hashtags. The noise from beyond those walls was growing louder, sharper, more unified. Through the thick glass and marble, a chant began to cut through like a drumbeat: "Play the whole tape, play the whole tape." It was rhythmic, relentless, and it carried the kind of force that made it impossible to pretend the crowd wasn't there. Reporters leaned toward the sound, some holding up phones to record it, others already live streaming the scene for their outlets. The chant bled into the hearing's audio, an uninvited but undeniable presence. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the aide guarding the device, her expression unreadable but focused, as if calculating whether this was the moment to push. Leavitt shifted uncomfortably, her fingers fussing with the edges of her papers, the motion betraying a nervous energy she couldn't contain. Cruz muttered something to the chairman, his tone clipped, as if to warn him that the room was slipping out of their control. In the gallery, journalists exchanged glances. Every one of them knew they were on the edge of a second seismic moment. The aide's hand hovered just above the recorder, his thumb brushing the play button without committing. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, but her gaze stayed locked on him, as if daring him to make the call. The protest chant outside grew louder, almost sensing with the heartbeat drum of the cameras recording every angle. And then the tension became a living thing, crowd and chamber breathing in the same rhythm, both waiting for a single click to change everything. The question was no longer whether the world wanted the rest of that recording. It was whether it would break loose here, now, with every lens on them. Would the full release happen this very moment, or would the truth be forced to wait behind locked doors on more time? Jasmine rose from her seat with the slow precision of someone about to land a final blow. She reached into her folder and pulled out a thin stack of papers, each page stamped with the seal of the executive office. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice cutting clean through the murmur of the chamber, "these are White House visitor logs from 2018 to 2020. She laid the top page flat under the document camera, and the monitors around the room flickered to display a trove of names, dates, and meeting locations. Her finger tapped 3 entries, each marked restricted access, unidentified Russian envoys, cleared through security without press notification, each meeting directly with the president or his top aides. The gallery shifted in a wave of whispers. Bernie Sanders leaned forward, scanning the screen with his brows knitting tighter. Jasmine's tone hardened. These visits never appeared on the public schedule. No press briefings, no records in the daily logs. And yet 3 separate occasions, all within weeks of intelligence warnings about Russian military escalation in Ukraine. She flipped to the next page, the camera zooming to highlight another entry. January 14, 2022, weeks after a briefing explicitly warned of heightened Russian aggression. They walked in. No oversight, no explanation. Leavitt's pen froze above her notes. Then she forced a tight smile and leaned toward her microphone. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, the American people are concerned about the crime that's exploding in our cities, not your political scavenger hunts through old visitor logs. President Trump made America safer. Jasmine's voice cut in before she could finish, sharp as glass. We're not talking about crime rates in Chicago, Ms. Leavitt. We're talking about secret Russian envoys walking into the Oval Office while your administration ignored direct warnings about Ukraine. The room tensed, even the chairman's hand hovering over the gavel seemed to pause midair. Jasmine stepped closer to the witness table, not shouting, but narrowing the space between them until every camera in the room had them locked in the same frame. You can try to change the subject, you can try to point fingers anywhere but here. But these logs don't lie. Someone let those envoys in. Someone met with them behind closed doors, and the American people deserve to know who and why. Outside, the chance of play the whole tape bled faintly through the marble, but in here, the silence was almost oppressive. Leavitt's fingers curled around her pen again, the tip pressing into the page so hard it threatened to tear through. Jasmine didn't break eye contact, her words now deliberate and slow. So, Ms. Leavitt, I'll ask you plainly, who were they, and what did they want? The camera zoomed tighter, catching the flicker in Leavitt's eyes the split second before an answer, the telltale hesitation of someone backed into the last corner they have left. How would Karoline Leavitt answer now, with nowhere left to run? Leavitt exhaled slowly, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before, stripped of its earlier defiance. I'll admit, she said, eyes darting briefly toward the press gallery, it was a poor choice of words, but I will not retract my statement. I stand by the substance of what I said. The phrasing was careful, but the tremor beneath it betrayed her like a crack spidering out from beneath polished glass. Jasmine didn't move for a moment, letting the admission hang in the air. Then she leaned in, her voice steady, her gaze locked on Leavitt like a spotlight that refused to dim. It's not the words, Ms. Leavitt, she said, each syllable deliberate. It's the choices, the choice to ignore warnings. The choice to meet behind closed doors with foreign envoys. The choice to treat a war like a bargaining chip. The sentence landed like a final verdict, and the tension in the room tightened until it felt breakable. Around the dais, several senators shifted in their seats, nodding almost imperceptibly. Bernie Sanders' arms folded across his chest, his chin dipping in slow agreement. Even a few on the other side of the aisle looked down at their notes, avoiding the cameras. The sound in the chamber had changed. It was no longer the restless rustle of political theater, but the stillness of people recognizing the moment might be bigger than the hearing itself. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but she didn't try to answer. Her pen tapped once against her notepad, then stopped. The cameras caught every detail, the faint tremor in her hand, the rigid set of her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. Somewhere in the back row of the gallery, a reporter mouthed the words she's done to a colleague. Outside, the chants had shifted into a low, steady roar, their rhythm in sync with the pressure building inside the room. Jasmine stayed upright, her hands resting lightly on the table, the posture of someone who had delivered the blow she came to deliver. She didn't gloat, didn't need to. The silence that followed was its own headline. And hanging over it all was the question now racing through every newsroom and political backroom in the country: had Karoline Leavitt just committed political career suicide? Live on national television. Within hours of the hearing's gavel falling, the numbers began to bleed. Overnight polling, pushed out in rapid-fire alerts to newsrooms, showed Leavitt's approval rating in free fall down 12 points in a single day, the steepest drop for any political figure in the last decade. Swing state focus groups described her testimony with words like shaken, cornered, and untrustworthy. Cable news plastered the charts across their screens, the red downward line a visual gut punch replayed on the hour. Online, the verdict was even more brutal. #Crockett drops the pays roared to the top of global trends, eclipsing entertainment, sports, and even breaking international news. Twitter feeds overflowed with clips of Jasmine's cutting lines, her steady glare, the frozen moment when Leavitt's confidence cracked. TikTok was a flood of reaction videos, veterans, students, political junkies each replaying the Putin audio and mouthing Jasmine's words. It's not the words. It's the choices. By evening, even late-night hosts were weaving the moment into their opening monologues. Cable pundits scrambled to frame the damage. Some on the right called it a temporary stumble, urging supporters to hold the line. Others whispered, off camera, that the campaign was in crisis mode, with donors demanding explanations before cutting another check. The left was already spinning victory reels, stitching together the day's most damning moments in to add certain to hit battleground states before week's end. Jasmine's own approval spiked, not just within her base but among independents who praised her as fearless and unflinching. In interviews, she remained disciplined, refusing to speculate on the tapes beyond what had been presented, telling reporters, "The facts are already louder than any spin." Every word she spoke seemed to sharpen the contrast between her and the image of Leavitt at that witness table. By nightfall, the Capitol dome stood lit against a restless sky, the hearings still replaying in homes, bars, and airport terminals across the country. Strategists from both parties huddled behind closed doors, staring at the same question buried beneath poll numbers and trending hashtags. Had the seismic shock of this day altered the ground beneath the 2024 race? Or was the aftershock still building, ready to fracture the map in ways no one yet saw coming? The Capitol was quiet now, its marble halls stripped of the day's roar, but Jasmine's office still pulsed with the faint blue glow of her laptop screen. The overhead lights were off, only the desk lamp burned, casting long shadows across stacks of notes and printouts from the hearing. Her phone lay face up beside her, vibrating every few minutes with new messages: constituents, veterans, Ukrainian Americans. She scrolled slowly, reading each one. A soldier who'd lost brothers in Donbass, a grandmother in Texas who'd fled Mariupol with nothing but a worn photograph, a high school teacher who said her students finally believed politics could matter. She stopped at a message from a Marine veteran, the words stark and unpolished. "You said what we couldn't say when we were over there. Keep going." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen, the weight of the day pressing into her shoulders. She thought about the faces behind those messages, about the price they'd pay while politicians traded slogans and silence. The hearing had been a battle, but it wasn't the war. Transparency wasn't a single act, it was a campaign. One she had just begun. On the corner of her desk lay the folder with the declassified memos, its edges worn from being handled so often. Next to it, a fresh stack of documents unread, unvetted, but already radiating the quiet threat of what they might contain. Outside, the city lights glimmered against the night, the faint hum of traffic drifting through the thick glass. She glanced toward the dome in the distance, lit like a sentinel, and felt the flicker of resolve sharpen in her chest. Jasmine closed her laptop, the screen's glow vanishing into darkness, and whispered into the empty room, "We're not done." She knew the cameras were gone, the chance outside had faded, and the nation's pulse was already moving to the next headline. But she also knew this was the moment to decide whether today's fire would burn out or spread. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a name she recognized from another committee. Another fight waiting to happen. Jasmine stared at it for a beat, then reached for the call. Today's battle was over, but the war for truth was far from finished. The only question now: what's the next battle? The morning after the hearing, America woke up to a country that didn't sound the same. Every channel ran it on loop the moment Jasmine Crockett leaned into the mic, voice like steel, and dropped the tapes that sent shockwaves through the chamber. CNN's Chyron blared the tapes that changed everything, while Fox scrambled to splice in disclaimers. MSNBC played the clip in slow motion, frame by frame, like it was the Zapruder film of political scandals. The airwaves crackled with disbelief, anger, vindication. Late-night hosts pounced, weaving the hearing into monologues that cut sharper than satire had in years. One played a split screen of Trump saying "I'm tough on Russia," while the tape rolled of his voice promising Putin Ukraine later. Another mimicked Karoline Leavitt's stammered denial, pausing for a beat so the audience could howl with laughter. But outside the comedy, the streets were swelling. In Chicago, a crowd gathered with homemade signs reading "Play the whole tape." In Dallas, veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian immigrants, chanting Jasmine's name in the August heat. Cable producers sent crews into diners and union halls, the same places where political wines usually moved slow, and this time found something different. Lifelong Republicans saying, "I didn't vote for her, but she's telling the truth." A retired coal miner in West Virginia, hat pulled low, told a reporter, "If that's what Trump said to Putin, I can't back that." Country first. In Pennsylvania, a suburban mother said she'd switched her mind overnight. "My son's in the Navy, he deserves better than secret deals with dictators." Grassroots organizers smelled momentum and moved fast. By noon, There were pop-up rallies in 15 cities. Hashtags like #TruthOverTricks and #Crockett drops the tapes dominated Twitter. TikTok flooded with remix edits of the hearing, set to everything from ominous orchestral swells to booming bass drops. The nation wasn't just watching, it was reacting, reshaping itself in real time. Back in her office, Jasmine's staff fed her live updates, trending charts, polling spikes, calls from states she'd never campaigned in. Each new clip of a voter flipping sides was another crack in the wall that had kept the country divided. Yet in the shadows of this momentum, the opposition was regrouping. Leavitt's allies were already booking airtime, planning counterattacks, framing Jasmine as a political arsonist. The question now wasn't whether America had heard the truth it had. The question was whether that truth could ignite something bigger than a news cycle, something that would survive the smear campaigns, the political spin, the next crisis waiting to dominate the headlines. Could one truth spark a national reckoning? The camera cut to Jasmine standing alone at the podium, the Capitol dome glowing behind her like a silent witness. Her eyes swept the nation through the lens, and when she spoke, it wasn't as a politician, it was as a citizen whose patience had run out. "Justice isn't partisan," she said, her voice steady but charged with the kind of conviction that makes a crowd hold its breath. "It's the people's right, and when that right is stolen, it's our duty, not just mine, not just yours, to take it back." The applause began like distant thunder, rolling in from the steps outside, then swelling until the entire chamber felt like it was shaking. She didn't smile. Instead, she let the weight of the moment hang heavy, like a gavel suspended midair. Some will call this grandstanding, some will call it dangerous. But what's dangerous is silence. What's dangerous is pretending not to see. And the truth is burning right in front of us. A veteran in the front row stood, saluting her without a word. The cameras caught it, and in that instant, the gesture became a symbol splashed across every feed in America. Jasmine leaned closer to the mic, her voice dropping into something intimate yet unyielding. "I've been called loud. I've been called reckless. I've been called unfit. But I will never be called afraid. Because the truth is worth every ounce of the fight, and every drop of the blood, sweat, and tears it takes to drag it into the light." The room roared again, but she held up a hand, letting the cheers simmer into a tense, waiting silence. Her gaze was unwavering, as if she was looking directly into the living rooms of millions. "Tonight, I've given you the truth. Not the polished truth, not the safe truth. The raw truth, the kind that changes things. And now it's in your hands." The screen faded to black over the sound of the audience still applauding. The words "Justice isn't partisan" burning across the frame in bold white letters. Then, her voice soft but sharp as a blade cut through one last time. "If you had the truth in your hands, would you have the courage to speak it?" In moments of injustice, silence is the easiest choice, but it's also the most dangerous. Jasmine's stand reminds us that truth is not just a weapon, it's a responsibility. We may not all speak in front of the nation, but each of us faces moments when doing what's right will cost us something. That's when courage matters most. Integrity is not measured by applause, but by the risks we take to protect what's fair and just. When your moment comes, will you choose comfort or will you choose courage? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.